They'd always talked about retiring somewhere quiet. Somewhere with clean air and tall pines and mornings that started with birdsong instead of alarms. For years, my parents kept a faded magazine clipping taped to the fridge, a picture of a mountain lodge, snow gently piled on the roof, a porch swing creaking under the weight of silence and peace. I bought them that dream. It took a decade of saving, cutting corners, skipping vacations, and turning down the home renovations I desperately needed. While friends were flying off to Mexico or upgrading kitchens, I was paying off a mortgage on a lodge 3 hours away from the city, a $375,000 promise I made to myself the day I saw that clipping curl at the edges. The day I handed them the keys, I expected nothing more than a moment. My mother gasped, pressed her hands to her mouth. My father blinked 3 times, like he couldn't believe the deed had his name on it. For a second, I felt like a daughter they saw, not the one who just always handled things, but someone who mattered. Sometimes, I told myself, watching them step over the threshold, all a daughter wants is a simple thank you that sounds like it means something. But I didn't know then that this gift would open more than just doors, it would unhinge an entire family. The lodge stood like something from a Christmas card, log beams, a stone fireplace, wide windows looking out on peaks that turned pink at dusk. The air always carried that cedar scent that clung to your clothes like a memory. It was peaceful, a place where time slowed down. They settled in quickly. I'd visit every other weekend, bringing groceries, tools, whatever needed doing. I'd shovel snow, patch leaks, replace batteries and smoke detectors. It was quiet work, the kind that lets you imagine you're doing something meaningful without having to talk about it. I gave up a lot to keep it running. Said no to weddings, skipped bonuses, put my own roof repairs on hold. There was pride in it, the kind that stings more than it soothes. I remember one dinner, chicken pot pie and a crackling fire. My father looked up and said, "You've done well, kiddo." My chest warmed for half a second before he added, "Your sister says the boys are thriving. She's always had a way with raising strong kids. Always back to her." Still, I told myself the lodge meant something. That maybe I wasn't the flashy one, or the favorite, but I'd built something lasting, something that would tether me to the family, finally. Then one weekend, I pulled up and knew something was off before I even stepped inside. The driveway was jammed with cars, some I didn't recognize. A pickup with Florida plates. An SUV sagging under the weight of suitcases. Inside, the air wasn't cedar, it was noise. Children running barefoot. Laughter in the hallway. My sister's voice floating in from the kitchen, "Oh hey. We moved in a few days ago." Surprise! Moved in. She said it like she was announcing a weather change. 15 people. Her in-laws, cousins, and some man they called Uncle T who I'm not sure was related to anyone. Sprawled across every room, sleeping bags, toothbrushes, cereal boxes. Their coats on the rack I built last Christmas. I looked at my parents, both sitting on the edge of the sofa, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's just temporary," my sister chirped, slapping a baby wipe onto a toddler's face. "You know, until they figure out their next move." But their framed photos were on the mantel. Their medicine bottles in the cabinet. You don't unpack like that for a weekend. That night, after the kids were put to bed and the kitchen finally stopped humming, I asked Mom to take a walk. She fidgeted with her sleeves. "They just needed a place," she said softly, "and you gave us this. It's big enough for everyone." I waited for Dad to chime in with sense. "Instead," he said, "they're family too. Your sister said you wouldn't mind." Wouldn't mind. Not once had anyone asked. I found my sister near the fireplace, scrolling her phone. "You moved in without even a call?" She didn't look up. "You gave them the house. You didn't say we couldn't live here too." Them. Not you. Them. I left before sunrise. Didn't sleep that night, just lay there replaying their voices like static in my chest. I had given them a mountain. And they'd turned it into a timeshare. You ever give someone the world, and they invite others to stomp on it? Days passed, and then the texts started. We're running low on eggs. Do you think you can bring more firewood next time? The vacuum's broken again. I wasn't their daughter anymore, I was maintenance. Then came the noise complaints. The neighbors weren't thrilled about the weekly karaoke parties. The makeshift fire pit. The toddler peeing off the porch. My father stopped returning calls. My mother's voice thinned out when she answered. Like she didn't want to say much with so many ears around. Then came the link. A friend sent it over, no comment. Just a link to an Airbnb listing, the Grand Peaks Family Retreat. My parents' lodge. My lodge. Photos I'd taken. Furniture I'd bought. Sleep 16 plus, the headline read. Perfect for family reunions. In one photo, I spotted my dad in the corner, face turned away. My mother near the window, arms crossed. I didn't just lose a house. I lost the thing I thought would finally make me belong. That's when I realized the lodge wasn't a gift anymore. It was a battleground. I pulled into the lodge driveway 2 weeks after I first noticed the shuffle. Something in the air said not homecoming but invitation unasked for. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and stood watching unfamiliar license plates, Georgia, Florida, Texas, lined up like visitors waiting for a show. Inside, I stepped through the front door and felt the air shift. The cedar-scented calm I had grown accustomed to just a month earlier had been replaced by the hum of voices and fluorescent-like energy. I walked down the hallway to what used to be my room, the place where I kept childhood photos, the handmade quilt I had sewn for my mother, and the small footlocker of my college keepsakes. The door was still mined by paint and knob, but inside the identity had changed. Tiny socks hung on a drying rack. A bassinet, bright and new. A baby mobile spinning overhead. My quilt nowhere in sight. A relative I didn't recognize glanced at me and asked lightly, "Are you the nanny?" My stomach dropped. I stood motionless while the world I built quietly packed up. The quilt, the photographs, the framed picture of my parents in front of their first cabin, they were gone. I didn't shout. I couldn't. I felt like walking into my own memory and realizing I'd become a footnote. Later that evening, we sat for dinner in that wood-paneled dining room I installed 2 years ago. Candles lit, windows showing mountain silhouettes outside. My sister raised her glass and smiled, to our new home. I forced a smile, the bread basket heavy in my hands. She explained, casual as if picking movie tickets, she and her husband were now listed as co-responsible for the lodge under an arrangement Dad apparently agreed to. The words hit me slow, sharp, no one asked me. I sat frozen while Terica said, "Murray's family is helping out, repairs, groceries, you know how it is, so it seemed only fair." Dad glanced down, cleared his throat, mumbling something about repairs. Mother reached for her napkin. I whispered inside, "I gave you a house." Somehow, I became the guest. The next night I cornered my mother in the kitchen, lighting dim overhead, dishes still in the sink. "How did this happen?" I asked. She turned the dishcloth, her fingers trembling. "Your sister said you were fine with it," she said, voice small. "She told me you'd moved on." I waited for her to say more. She couldn't. Silence answered. In that pause I realized my quietness had been weaponized. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand space. They took it anyway. And for what reason? Because I let them believe I didn't care. That night I retrieved a framed photo of us three on the deck of the lodge, just my parents and me, and I placed it on the living room shelf. The next morning I found it removed. A cousin of Tarika leaned in and told me, "Relax, you should just not make this about yourself." I clenched my jaw, stepped outside and texted my lawyer friend, hypothetically, if someone gifted property to their parents but didn't sign anything away. My phone buzzed, "We should talk. This might not be as clean as you think." I sat at a small bistro table in Denver, the kind where plates clink and strangers behind me still linger in conversation. Across from me, Elise leaned forward, glasses pushed halfway down her nose, her laptop open between us. "Look," she said, voice low, "this is more than a gift. The paperwork shows you still own the property." I looked away. Quiet burned inside me like ice. For years I assumed I'd relinquished control. Instead I was told I never did. The title transfer from me to my parents was listed simply as occupancy rights. No language about title, no clause severing my ownership. Elise tapped the screen. "Someone may have taken advantage of your silence." I thought back to Dad's words years ago, "Trust is currency. Spend it wisely." I never understood how expensive that currency would become. My confusion shifted into betrayal, but beneath it was hope. I still had a way in. That drive to Aspen County felt longer than usual. The roads pitched upward, pine trees gathering in tight ranks like spectators. At the records office, the clerk's eyes flicked to a sheet with a fresh entry, Tarika Van Kohler's name now listed. A notarized letter bearing our father's signature, dated 3 weeks ago, authorizing joint property use. It looked legitimate. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Not just my sister claiming space. My own father handing her the invitation. I did not raise my voice. I asked softly, "So peace of mind costs that much?" The clerk avoided my eyes. My father's betrayal wasn't loud. It was polite, efficient. His silence had always been easier than confrontation. And now it was my fault for believing it meant something. Back in the car, I didn't call. I let the hill slide past and the lodge's cedar scent rise in memory, and in grief. My phone buzzed. Mom's name appeared. "Don't make this ugly, Mara," she said. I pictured her voice under the roof we built, crowded now by voices not ours. I closed my eyes. They had done the math. The louder you stay quiet, the more people fill the silence with their own story. That night in my apartment, I opened folders I'd ignored in the busy rush of life, photos of the lodge's first holiday, texts I sent Dad, bills I paid quietly. I recorded an audio memo, "You cannot control who respects you, but you can control who uses your silence." I printed records, downloaded PDFs, and saved every timestamp, every digital fingerprint of what I built and what I lost. Then I found the email, subject line signature record _vk.pdf. Tarika's initials. It sat there like a confession. My eyes widened more than once. The peace I'd hoped for had become a courthouse waiting to happen. Silence was no longer my refuge. It was a witness. It was after midnight, and the only sound in my apartment was the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional car sliding down the wet Denver street. I sat in the kitchen, papers fanned out like a broken deck of cards, coffee gone cold in my hand. I kept reading the same line on the deed, my name. Not theirs. Mine. I hadn't lost the lodge. I had just stopped looking. I thought back to a winter afternoon when Dad stood beside the old truck, handing me the folder I thought sealed the transfer. "The title isn't just a name, Mara," he'd said. "It's your standing in this family." It sounded poetic then. Now it felt like a warning I hadn't understood. There was betrayal, yes. But in the quiet, there was something else, room for resolve. No more waiting. That morning, a ping on my phone pulled me back to the present. A link. A TikTok video. I tapped it, and up came Kaylin Bexley's grinning face, the daughter of Tarika's husband's cousin, or maybe niece. I stopped keeping track. She danced through the lodge's living room, panning her phone around as she lip-synced to a pop song. Behind her, my mother sat stiff on the couch. Dad hovered by the fireplace, blinking into the camera like he hadn't realized he was in the shot. The caption read, "When the in-laws take over your lodge, face with tears of joy, family takeover blessed." Comments poured in. LOL, rich girl problems. Isn't this the story of every sister playing catch-up? Her face in the back though, yikes. I swallowed the embarrassment and rewatched it twice. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But I said out loud, they want a performance. I'll give them facts. By noon I was on the phone with Luke Creighton, my other lawyer friend. We reviewed the ownership documents, the digital receipts, the timestamps of every visit, every supply drop, every text message my parents never replied to. I wasn't collecting evidence for drama, I was compiling a timeline. Facts don't scream. They don't even knock. They sit there and wait for someone to notice. I scheduled the letter for courier delivery. Formal, polite. Requesting a family dinner at the lodge. To celebrate together, I wrote. The kind of phrasing no one can reject without looking small. The reply came back the next day. From Mom. We'll be there. Please be kind. Friday arrived faster than I expected. The drive up the mountain was quiet. Not tense, focused. My hands didn't shake on the wheel. They gripped it like I was steering into the storm I already knew was coming. At the lodge, the air had a manufactured warmth. Fire lit. Music low. But the chill in the room was personal. They'd set the table for 9. I added my own chair. I sat directly across from Tarika and her husband. Tarika's lipstick was fresh, her blouse a little too polished for a family meal. She smiled like nothing was wrong. I smiled like everything had been documented. Midway through dinner, I slid the envelope across the table. I'm here because the facts say I belong at this table. And because you've all been acting like I don't. Forks paused midair. Dad blinked, eyes flicking to Mom, then back to me. Tarika picked up the envelope, peeled it open, read the first line. Then she looked right at me, not angry, not shaken. Just amused. She folded the paper neatly and said, "We're going to respond very publicly." I got there an hour early. The air was sharp and dry, mountain cold biting through my gloves as I unlocked the lodge door. It smelled the same, cedar, faint smoke, and something that used to feel like home. I placed my boots carefully by the fireplace, the same pair I'd worn the day we first opened the place. I remembered how proud my parents were that day. How they called it our legacy. Funny how quickly that word changes meaning. I set the table myself, long oak, polished to a mirror shine. My father's seat at the far end, my mother's across from him. Tarika and Murray opposite me, perfectly framed in the middle. 4 wine glasses, cloth napkins, and 1 sleek leather folder by my plate, marked property review. Subtle enough to look professional, obvious enough to sting. I poured water, smoothed the tablecloth, and waited. Mom used to say, "It's just dinner, not a war." Tonight, it was both. The door opened at 6. Tarika walked in first, smile tight, perfume heavy. Murray followed with a box of wine like a peace offering. My parents trailed behind, Mom wringing her hands, Dad looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. We started civil. Terica complimented the meal I'd ordered in. Murray launched into a story about his contracting work up in Breckenridge, some new project he was proud of. I nodded, listened. Pretended. But I kept my eyes on Dad, the way his jaw locked every time I spoke, how his fork slowed when I shifted in my seat. After dessert plates were cleared, I folded my napkin neatly and said, there are a few things we need to clear up tonight. Property lines. And family ones. The air changed. I pulled the folder from beside me, opening it slowly. Pages gleamed under the light, signatures, seals, ownership clauses. My father's hand twitched. Mom froze. Mara, Dad said quietly, this is not the time. I think it's exactly the time, I answered, voice steady. Terica leaned back, swirling her wine. Are we really doing paperwork over dinner? I looked at her. It's not paperwork. It's history. I began reading, clauses about ownership, usage rights, occupancy. My lawyer's careful wording was like armor. For once, no one could twist my silence. When I slid the next folder across the table, labeled occupancy versus ownership, Terica's smirk cracked into something sharper. Are you really threatening your own parents? She asked, her voice sweet as vinegar. I met her stare. No. I'm protecting what they forgot was mine. That hit something. Her expression shifted from smug to cold. Then let's settle this in court, she said. I've already spoken to someone. The room went still. Even Murray looked surprised. Mom's hand flew to her chest. Terica, she whispered, don't. But Terica wasn't stopping. You want to play lawyer? Let's play. Dad's face turned pale. You talked to a lawyer without US, he said, voice low. She shrugged. Someone had to. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't raise my voice. Fine, I said. But understand something, the public record isn't kind to you. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've seen the TikToks. The property filings. The Airbnb listings. And if you want to drag this into the light, make sure you're ready to stand under it. Murray finally spoke up, voice nervous. Mara, we didn't mean to push you out. I smiled faintly. You didn't push. You replaced. Mom's eyes filled, Dad looked down at his plate, and for the first time in weeks, no one spoke over me. I gathered the folders, stacked them neatly, and said, this is your notice. You have 30 days. Terica's chair scraped against the floor. She stood abruptly, knocking her wine glass over. Red spread across the white tablecloth like a wound. She leaned close, her voice cutting through the silence. Then you'll regret giving us that much time. I pulled into the driveway later than planned, dusk fading into twilight as I parked and sat in the car for a moment, tasting the cold air through the cracked window. The dinner had left a bruise, not visible, but heavy. I replayed Dad's hesitation, Terica's sideways grin, Murray's smirk. Their words were quiet but loud enough to echo. I took a breath. I'd chosen to stay calm. That's how I ended up here, by not reacting too early. Luke's voice rang in my ear, file the injunction now. I shook my head. Not yet, I told him over coffee later. Because sometimes, when people think you won't act, they show their worst selves. I logged into the feed from the lodge's cameras I'd installed in spring, corners no one looked at, hallways no one noticed. I watched. I waited. Because watchful beats wild when the stakes are yours. Morning arrived without fanfare. My security alert pinged at 2:14 a.m. The garage camera lit up. Murray appeared in the frame, half-lit silhouette dragging the side table I meant to keep pristine under the porch. He jerked it into the driveway, the impact sound sharp even through the recording feed. Then, she wants it back? She'll get it back in pieces. The words slammed into me. I watched the table fracture, with legs snap, the top crack into shards. My hands shifted, I captured every second. The mix of heartbreak, that something I built was being destroyed, and grit, that I wouldn't look away, filled me. I didn't call Dad. I didn't tell Mom. I didn't react. I sat in silent fury, saving the footage. The screen glowed. My resolve hardened. When I drove up midday to the lodge, I didn't announce myself. The front door was open. Voices, children, the smell of frying onions. A scene of normalcy someone else was living. Tarika glanced up, phone in hand. Thought you'd be busy lawyering up, she said, voice casual. I ignored her. I walked straight to Murray. He leaned against the counter with a beer, looking comfortable in the mess. Do it again, I said softly, and I pressed charges. His laughter filled the room. Then the verbal lash, you're a pathetic excuse for a daughter, just like your mother was weak. The blow landed sharper than anything physical. But I stood my ground. I looked him right in the eye. You're not part of this family. You're a squatter with a loud voice. The room shifted. Kids froze. Adults stopped. My father looked at me. My mother's hand went up to her mouth. Tarika's smile vanished. I opened my bag and placed a printed termination notice on the coffee table, thick envelope, signature line, official stamp. I addressed my parents, you have 72 hours to decide whose side you're on. Murmurs rose, phones were pulled out, cameras flashed. Tarika shouted something. I didn't listen. I turned and walked out. Outside, the air hit me, sharp and clear. I paused by my car, whispered, 3 days. Let's see who chooses truth. The engine started, tires rolled over the gravel, leaving the place behind. That night, my phone lit up. Mom's name. A message, please don't make us choose. Not like this. I read it. My answer stayed silent. I arrived at the lodge just after sunrise, the mountains silent except for distant bird calls. In the driveway I sat for a moment, the engine off, watching the lodge through the windshield. For years it had been my offering, something I hoped would secure my place in this family. Now it felt like the stage for something else entirely. I pulled the door open and walked inside under the dim light. The interior smelled of cedar, familiar yet changed. I made my way to Dad's old archive room behind the office, a place I rarely visited. The shelf held film tins, boxes of slides, tapes of the opening day. I selected the roll labeled 2001 Lodge Opening, Thorne Family, and carried it into the dining hall. I set up a projector and pressed play. On screen, Dad stood before a gathering of guests and said, confidently, this lodge is Mara's gift to our family. He paused, brows furrowed, eyes shifting off camera, as though remembering something he should have said but didn't. Guests applauded, Dad nodded, Mom smiled in the background. I watched that moment and felt its weight. It wasn't about the words anymore, it was the truth behind them. Brunch was in full swing when I asked everyone to gather in the dining room. The children ran in and out, laughter echoed in the hallway, and the coffee pot dangled from its cord. I didn't wait for quiet, I just projected the tape. Breadcrumbs of conversation fell silent mid-sentence. Tarika froze, holding her fork, color draining from her face. Murray's confident grin faded and he shifted in his seat. Mom touched Dad's arm, glancing at the screen with wet eyes. The words replayed, "This lodge is Mara's gift." I let the silence grow until someone coughed. Then I said, "This is how it started." My voice was soft, but steady. "And this is how it must be acknowledged." I felt what had begun as vindication turn into sorrow. Because I'd held the proof, but the faces it hit were still the people I once called family. Later we moved upstairs into the small conference room. I stood at the head of the table, papers, time-stamped logs, receipts and property records laid before us. The lodge, the gift, the ownership, all of it laid bare. I said, "I am still the legal owner of this property. If occupancy continues without my agreement, I will file for eviction and damages." The words hit the room like a cold wind. Murmurs rose. Tarika attempted to respond, but the minutes rolled past the moment she needed. Murray leaned back, eyes shifting, his arms crossed. Dad's face was rigid, Mom swallowed hard. I met Tarika's eyes and said, "You can argue. You can protest. But you cannot ignore this." Triumph and grief mingled inside me. Watching the family I trusted unravel was both release and heartbreak. My father finally spoke, voice shallow. I didn't realize how deep this would go." I looked at him. "Yes, you did. You just didn't think we would get here." Mom sobbed quietly beside him. "We never wanted you at odds with your sister, sweetie." I reached out, placed my hand gently on hers. "I'm not against her. I've been against being erased." The words came without anger. They came from clarity. For a moment the air softened, the fight in my chest loosened. But it only lasted a breath before I leaned forward, folder in hand. I stood again, addressed everyone in the room. "I've given this home, my name, and my heart to this place. I will no longer give what belongs to me away." I placed the folder in front of Tarika. The title read Eviction Notice, Draft. My parents looked at me, eyes wide. "You have 48 hours to decide where you will stand," I said, voice calm. As I turned toward the door, Tarika muttered, barely audible, "We'll see how much your lawyer is worth." I paused, looked back once. The phrase sliced air. I walked out. In the hallway I took a deep breath, the cold marble under my boots snapping with clarity. The car engine rumbled minutes later. My phone buzzed on the seat, a notification. Local real estate mogul files countersuit over Mountain Lodge ownership. My stomach dropped, then settled. This moment was not the end, it was opening fire. The news didn't hit like a bomb, it seeped in. Like a slow leak under the floorboards you don't notice until the wood starts to rot. I was brushing crumbs off the counter from lunch when my phone vibrated twice, then once more, and then didn't stop. By the time I picked it up, there were 5 missed calls and 9 messages. The lodge's name was in a headline, plastered across a screenshot from the brunch blow-up. The same clip I thought had been recorded in private was now circulating on TikTok, then picked up by a local reporter who linked it to the lawsuit I filed just days earlier. The evening news segment was clean, dramatic, and impersonal. Family feud over $375,000 Mountain Lodge erupts into legal war, the anchor read. The footage cut to me, standing still, measured. In the background, Tarika's voice cracked sharp and high, screaming something about betrayal and property lines. They blurred her face, but not the shame in her tone. I stood there in my kitchen, the light above flickering, watching myself on a loop. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Not of the fight, but of how many eyes now knew what had been private pain. My phone kept buzzing. A former co-worker. 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone from the old church choir group left a voicemail with nothing but a sigh. Dad didn't call. Mom finally did. Or rather, she texted, "You need to fix this, Mara." It's humiliating. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I put the phone face down and went outside for air. I didn't respond to her. What was there to say? The only thing I could fix was myself, and I had. The rest of them were reacting to the truth finally walking into the light on its own 2 feet. And it was loud. The next day, the storm shifted. Someone dug up a post from Tarika's old college blog. Nothing scandalous, until it wasn't. Someone else clipped audio from the video where Murray, in the heat of it, had shouted something about people like her always needing drama, which didn't sit well with the internet. Comments started pouring in. You married into money and think that gives you the right to someone else's inheritance? She's acting entitled, not like a sister. Classic. Screaming while standing in a house you didn't build. And worse. More brutal. Too personal. A woman I didn't recognize, apparently an old high school friend of Tarika's, commented under one of the news reposts, "Always knew she had a gift for playing victim when convenient. But this is low." I said nothing. Not a like, not a reply. I just saved the screenshots. Quietly. Not because I planned to use them, just to remind myself that I hadn't imagined this mess. That the chaos had real-world consequences beyond our family name. Murray deleted his Facebook. Tarika's Instagram went silent. For the first time, I felt the public tide turn. Not in a cruel way. But in a way that let me breathe. My shoulders didn't slump like they had been. My chest didn't carry all the weight. And then, my father called. "You need to call off the dogs," he said, without a greeting. His voice was quiet. Exhausted. I said, "I didn't release anything, Dad." The truth walked out on its own. "You just didn't lock the door behind it." He sighed but didn't argue. For the first time, I think he knew there was no talking this one down. My mother cried on the phone that night. She said she couldn't sleep. Said she never thought we'd fall apart like this. We didn't fall apart, I told her. We were always cracked. The truth just showed where. People started packing. Slowly. Like they didn't want to admit the vacation was over. Some cousins messaged me quietly, short notes. "We didn't know it was that bad. I'm sorry for how it looked." I didn't hold grudges, but I didn't open my arms either. I made it clear, no visitors unless I cleared them myself. The lodge was being restored, not just physically. Spiritually. Boundaries, finally drawn. And respected. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept through. 2 nights later, I was in the living room folding laundry when I heard it. A knock. 3 soft taps. I moved to the door slowly, cautious out of habit now. I looked through the peephole and froze. Tarika. No suitcase. No phone in her hand. Just her. She was crying. Barely able to speak. "I need to talk," she said. "Just you and me." I stood still for what felt like forever. Then I opened the door. Only halfway. I asked, voice steady, "Is this about the lodge, or about being sisters again?" She sat across from me, legs tucked under herself on the couch like she used to do when we were girls sneaking cookies after bedtime. The tea was too hot, the mugs mismatched, one with faded sunflowers, the other chipped at the handle. We didn't talk for a while. Just sat there with steam rising between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I didn't realize I was becoming mom," she said. "Grabbing at things I didn't earn. Making it feel like it was mine just because I wanted it bad enough." I let that sit. She wasn't wrong. And she wasn't making excuses either. She was owning it. That was new. "I had to learn some hard stuff," I said. Boundaries. Self-worth. That enabling someone, even if they're family, doesn't make you kind, it makes you complicit in your own erasure. She nodded. No tears. No grand apology. Just listening. And I did the same. Because sometimes that's the bravest thing we can do for each other. "I forgive you," I said. "But I'm not dropping the court process." Her eyes didn't flinch. She didn't ask me to. That mattered more than if she had. "Forgiveness," I said, "doesn't mean I forget who I am to make you feel better about who you've been." The in-laws had left quietly the week before. Murray first, his SUV loaded with cases and clothes. The others followed suit. Nobody slammed a door. Nobody yelled on the way out. It was like they knew they'd overstayed something they were never really invited into. The lodge was mine again. Not just by paper, but in presence. I'd spent the past month clearing the rooms, stripping back the paint, repolishing the floors. Not to erase the past, but to reset the foundation. I met with a lawyer and had my will rewritten. The lodge wouldn't go to family. It would become a retreat center for caretakers, teachers, and overworked single mothers. Those who never had a place to exhale. Once I was gone, this place would become that. My mother came by last weekend. She brought a pie, pecan, her usual peace offering. She hugged me longer than she ever had, but said nothing about the suit. I didn't press. Some grief stays silent. Dad hadn't spoken to me. Not since the brunch. I sent him an old photo, me as a kid, holding up a fish while he laughed behind me. No caption. He didn't reply. But he kept it. That's enough for now. I slept deeper these days. No dreams, just rest. A week later, our first visitor arrived. A widow from Idaho. She didn't want a tour, just sat on the deck for hours, hands folded, looking out over the valley like it could answer something. I watched from the kitchen window. This, I whispered to myself, is why I did it. I started planning small weekend writing workshops, women over 55 only. Some came shy, some came loud. All left a little lighter. Stories were told. Laughter spilled across the deck at night. The walls held healing now, not secrets. One afternoon, I opened a letter addressed to M. James. Inside was a cashier's check. No note. No return address. Just a signature, T.H. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But I smiled. By the time autumn arrived, the leaves rusted into reds and burnt gold. The air turned sharp. I lit the fire pit out back and sat alone, the same spot where we used to grill burgers as a family. My hands wrapped around a warm mug. The lodge wasn't just wood and glass. It was my line in the sand. My way of saying, here. This far. No further. We're told that family is everything. That we owe them our patience, our silence, our loyalty. But sometimes, what we owe most is to ourselves. Boundaries are love wearing grown-up shoes. Letting go isn't giving up. It's choosing yourself without apology. That lesson cost me $375,000. and gave me my soul back. And sometimes, the family you build is the one that shows up when you open your door to the unknown.